While I was standing at my wife's grave, watching the casket lower into the ground, my son was at my house. He was canceling my health insurance from my home computer. He was handing the keys of my car to a buyer he'd found online. He was having a locksmith drill out the deadbolts and install new locks that my keys wouldn't open. He did all of this in 4 hours. The 4 hours I was at the funeral of his mother, the woman who gave birth to him, the woman who nursed him through fevers and drove him to school and sat beside his bed reading stories until he fell asleep. While I was saying goodbye to her, he was erasing me from my own life. And he would have gotten away with it, all of it, if my neighbor, Margaret Owens, hadn't been watching from her kitchen window with her phone in her hand, recording every single thing she saw. Before we go any further, thank you for being here. If this story has your attention, take a second and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from today. It truly helps this channel reach more people who need to hear these stories. And a gentle reminder, while this story carries real emotions and real lessons, some names, details, and events have been fictionalized for narrative and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals is coincidental. The truth behind this message is what matters. Stay with me on this one. My name is Warren Briggs. I'm 67 years old. I live, or I should say I was living, in a house on Chestnut Lane in Roanoke, Virginia. A 2-story colonial that my wife, Patty, and I bought in 1991. 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard with a dogwood tree that Patty planted the year our son was born. We paid off the mortgage in 2014. The house was worth $420,000. It was ours, free and clear. 33 years of payments, and every one of them was worth it, because every room in that house held a memory of the life we'd built together. Patty. Patricia Ann Briggs, born Patricia Kozlowski, died on April 2nd, 2024. Breast cancer. She'd been fighting it for 3 years. Surgery, chemo, radiation, the whole war. She fought it the way she fought everything, with stubbornness, with humor, with the absolute refusal to let the thing that was killing her steal her dignity before it stole her life. She lost. Cancer doesn't care about dignity or stubbornness or humor. It just takes. And on a Tuesday morning in April, in our bedroom, in our bed, with me holding her hand and the dogwood tree blooming outside the window, Patty let go. She was 65. We'd been married for 38 years. And the world without her in it made no sense to me at all. Patty and I had one son, Russell, born 1992. Russell is 32 years old, and for the first 25 years of his life, he was a good kid. Not exceptional, not the kind of son you brag about at barbecues, but solid, reliable. The kind of young man who showed up for Thanksgiving and called on Mother's Day and didn't cause problems. Russell worked in car sales. He'd been selling cars since he was 22, a decade of commission checks, floor shifts, and the particular hustle that automotive sales requires. He was good at it. He had a smile that made people trust him, and a handshake that sealed deals. He could sell a car to a man who'd walked in looking for a lawnmower. But car sales is a feast or famine business, and Russell lived like every month was a feast, even when the famine was coming. He spent money the way water moves, downhill, fast, and without thinking about where it ends up. New apartment every 2 years, new clothes every season, a leased BMW that cost more per month than my first mortgage payment. Credit cards maxed, savings non-existent. Russell married a woman named Tasha in 2021. Tasha was a bartender at a restaurant where Russell had taken a client to dinner. She was 26, attractive, and had the same relationship with money that Russell had. It existed to be spent immediately, on things that looked good from the outside. Patty didn't like Tasha. She never said it in those words. Patty was too diplomatic for that. But I could read it in the way she held her face during dinners with the two of them. A tightness around her mouth, a stillness in her eyes. The particular expression of a woman who sees something wrong and is choosing her moment to say it. She chose a Saturday morning, 3 months after the wedding. We were on the porch, drinking coffee, watching the dogwood. "Warren, I need to tell you something about Russell and Tasha." "What about them?" "They're in trouble. Financial trouble. Russell called last week asking to borrow $5,000. I said no. He said it was for a car repair. I called the dealership where he works and asked if his BMW had been in the shop. It hadn't. Maybe it's a different car." "It's not a different car. He lied. And when a person lies about needing money, the real need is worse than the lie." "How much worse?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." Patty found out. Over the next few months, she pieced together the full picture, not through snooping, but through the careful, patient observation of a woman who'd spent 30 years managing an insurance office and knew how to read financial distress the way a doctor reads symptoms. She noticed the new clothes that Russell stopped wearing after a month, bought on credit, returned for refunds when the bill came. She noticed that Tasha's social media showed restaurant meals and vacations that a bartender's salary couldn't support. She noticed Russell's BMW disappearing for 2 weeks, which meant a lease payment had been missed, and the car had been temporarily repossessed. "They're drowning, Warren," Patty told me one evening. "Credit cards, the lease, the apartment. They're spending $6,000 a month on a combined income that might be $5,500 in a good month. The math doesn't work. And when the math doesn't work, people start looking for other sources." "Other sources?" "Us. Our house, our savings, your life insurance." "Patty, that's our son." "I know who he is. I also know what debt does to people. It makes them desperate. And desperate people rationalize things that would horrify them under normal circumstances." I told Patty she was overthinking it. I told her Russell would figure it out. I told her the same thing I'd told her every time she'd raised a concern about our son, that he was a grown man and he'd handle his problems. Patty didn't argue. She did what she always did when I dismissed her concerns. She prepared. She went to our lawyer, a man named Frank DeLuca, the same Frank who would later prosecute Russell's case, and she updated our trust. She added provisions that protected the house, the savings, and the life insurance from any claim by Russell unless I personally authorized it. She added a clause that required my physical, in-person signature for any changes to the accounts. No digital access, no phone authorization, no power of attorney without Frank's oversight. "I want to make sure Warren is protected," she told Frank. "From everyone." "Including Russell?" "Especially Russell." She also did something I didn't learn about until after the trial. She told Margaret. One afternoon in January 2024, 3 months before she died, Patty walked next door and sat in Margaret's kitchen and told her everything. The debt, the desperation, the concern that Russell and Tasha were positioning themselves to take advantage of Warren after Patty was gone. "Margaret, I'm dying. I know that. The cancer's winning. And when I'm gone, Warren is going to be vulnerable. He trusts Russell. He trusts everyone. It's his best quality and his worst quality. I need someone to watch out for him." "What do you want me to do?" "Watch, just watch. Watch the house. Watch who comes and goes. Watch Russell. And if you see anything that doesn't look right, anything at all, document it. Take pictures, take video, write it down, and then call Frank DeLuca." Margaret promised. And Margaret kept her promise. So, when Russell showed up at 12:25 p.m. on the day of Patty's funeral, Margaret wasn't just a nosy neighbor looking out her window. She was a sentinel, placed there by a dying woman who'd known with the certainty that only a mother can have, that her son would come for what wasn't his. Together, Russell and Tasha were a financial disaster. They lived in a $2,400 a month apartment they couldn't afford. They drove 2 leased vehicles. They had $68,000 in combined credit card debt. And they had a plan to fix all of it. A plan that depended on one event: my death. I didn't know about the plan. I didn't know about the debt. I didn't know that my son had been looking at my house, my car, my savings, and my life insurance policy the way a hungry man looks at a locked pantry. I didn't know because Patty was alive. And when Patty was alive, she was the wall between me and everything that could hurt me. She managed the family. She managed Russell. She managed the conversations and the boundaries and the careful balance of love and discipline that kept our son in line. When Patty died, the wall came down, and Russell walked right through. Patty's funeral was on April 6th, 2024, a Saturday. The service was at St. Andrew's Church on Main Street, the church where Patty and I had been married, where Russell had been baptized, where Patty had volunteered every Christmas for 30 years. The church was full, standing room only. 200 people who'd loved Patty, friends, colleagues from the insurance agency where she'd worked as an office manager, neighbors, members of her book club, parents from Russell's old school who remembered the woman who'd organized every bake sale and field trip for 8 consecutive years. Russell was at the funeral. He sat in the front row. He wore a dark suit. He held Tasha's hand. He cried, or he performed crying, which I couldn't distinguish at the time because grief makes you generous with other people's emotions. You assume everyone's tears are real because yours are. The service started at 10 a.m. The burial was at 11:30. The reception at the church hall was from noon to 2 p.m. The entire event, from opening hymn to last handshake, took 4 hours. 4 hours was all Russell needed. Here's what I didn't know until later. Russell left the reception at 12:15 p.m., 15 minutes after it started. He told me he was going to the restroom. He told Tasha he'd be right back. He walked out the side door of the church hall, got in his car, and drove to my house on Chestnut Lane. He had a key. He'd had a key since he was 16. I'd never asked for it back because why would I? He was my son. Margaret Owens saw him arrive. Margaret is 72 years old, retired school principal, and the best neighbor anyone could ask for. She's lived next door to us for 19 years. She knew Patty. She loved Patty. She'd brought meals to the house during Patty's chemo and sat with her on the porch during the good days when Patty had enough energy to watch the dogwood bloom. Margaret wasn't at the funeral. She'd said goodbye to Patty privately the day before at the house. She'd told me, "Warren, I'll stay home and keep an eye on things. You never know what happens to empty houses during funerals. People read obituaries for addresses." She meant burglars. What she got was something worse. Margaret was in her kitchen washing dishes when she saw Russell's BMW pull into my driveway at 12:25 p.m. She thought nothing of it at first. Maybe he'd come to pick something up. Maybe he'd forgotten something. Then she saw him open the front door and go inside. 5 minutes later, she saw him sit down at the desk in my study, visible through the window, and open my computer. That struck me as odd, Margaret told me later. Your mother's reception was happening right then. Why would Russell be at your house on your computer instead of at the reception? Margaret kept watching. She didn't know why. Instinct. The instinct of a woman who'd spent 35 years as a school principal, reading the behavior of children and young adults, recognizing when something was off before anyone else did. She picked up her phone. She opened the camera, and she started recording. At 12:32 p.m., Margaret recorded Russell on my computer. Through the study window, she could see the screen. He was on a website. She couldn't read it from that distance, but she could see him typing rapidly, clicking through pages, entering information. I later learned what he was doing. He was logged into my health insurance portal, Blue Cross Blue Shield. He knew my username and password because he'd watched me log in during Patty's treatment. He'd been sitting next to me at the kitchen table 6 months earlier when I'd checked the claims for Patty's chemotherapy, and he'd memorized the credentials the way a car salesman memorizes a customer's budget, automatically, reflexively, as information that might be useful later.
He canceled my health insurance. Not reduced, not modified. Canceled. Effective immediately. The confirmation email arrived in my inbox at 12:38 p.m. while I was standing in a church hall accepting condolences from Patty's book club. At 12:45 p.m., Margaret recorded a white pickup truck pulling into my driveway. A man she didn't recognize got out and walked to my car, a 2020 Honda Accord that Patty and I had bought together, the last car we'd ever choose as a couple. Russell came out of the house and met the man in the driveway. They talked for 3 minutes. Then the man handed Russell an envelope. Russell handed him the car keys, and the man drove away in my Honda Accord. Margaret recorded all of it: the truck, the man, the envelope, the handshake, the keys, my car disappearing down Chestnut Lane. She told me later, "Warren, when I saw that man drive away in your car, I knew something was very wrong. You don't sell someone's car while they're at a funeral. That's not grief. That's theft." At 1:10 p.m., a locksmith van arrived. Bob's Lock and Key, Margaret recorded the name, the license plate, the phone number painted on the side. A man in coveralls got out and went to my front door. Russell was there to meet him. Margaret recorded the locksmith drilling out the front door deadbolt. She recorded him installing a new lock. She recorded him moving to the back door and doing the same. She recorded Russell paying the locksmith in cash. Bills from the envelope the car buyer had given him. My front door, my back door. New locks, new keys. Keys that I didn't have. While I was at the church, shaking hands and accepting "I'm so sorry for your loss" from 200 people, my son was locking me out of my own home. At 1:35 p.m., Margaret recorded Russell carrying boxes from my house to his BMW. 4 trips. Boxes that she couldn't identify from her window, but that I later learned contained Patty's jewelry, my personal financial documents, and the fireproof lockbox from the master bedroom closet. The lockbox that contained our marriage certificate, the house deed, my life insurance policy, and $8,500 in emergency cash that Patty had insisted on keeping because she'd grown up in a family where cash in the house meant safety. At 1:52 p.m., Russell locked the new front door with the new key, got in his BMW, and drove away. The entire operation had taken 87 minutes, planned, rehearsed, and executed with the efficiency of a man who'd been thinking about this for a long time. Margaret stopped recording. She had 47 minutes of video on her phone. She sat at her kitchen table and stared at it, trying to understand what she'd just witnessed. But she already understood. Patty had told her this would happen. Patty had seen it coming from 3 months away, from a hospital bed, through the fog of chemotherapy and pain, and the knowledge that she was running out of time to protect the man she loved. Margaret pulled out the piece of paper Patty had given her in January. On it was Frank DeLuca's phone number and 3 words in Patty's handwriting. "Call him first." Then she called me. I was still at the reception. My phone was on silent. She called 3 times. I didn't pick up. She sent a text message that I wouldn't see for another 2 hours. Warren, come to my house before you go home. Don't go to your house first. It's important. I'm sorry. Patty told me to watch. She was right. That last line, Patty told me to watch, she was right. I didn't understand it when I read it. I understand it now. I read the text at 2:45 p.m., sitting in the church parking lot alone, in the suit I'd worn to bury my wife. The world was gray. Everything was gray. The sky, the parking lot, the inside of my chest. I almost drove home without reading it, but something in the text, the Patty told me to watch, made me turn left instead of right. I knocked on Margaret's door. She opened it, and I could see immediately that something was wrong. Her face had the particular expression of a person who has bad news and knows exactly how to deliver it because she'd been rehearsing since January. Margaret, what is it?
Warren, sit down. I need to show you something. And then I need to tell you something that Patty asked me to keep secret until it was necessary.
Secret?
Patty came to me in January. She told me about Russell, about the debt, about what she was afraid would happen after she was gone. She asked me to watch, to record, to document. She gave me Frank DeLuca's number. She said, if Russell comes for what isn't his, Margaret will have the evidence.
I stared at Margaret. My wife had been dead for 4 days, and she was still protecting me. From her grave. Through a neighbor she'd recruited as a guardian 3 months before she died. Show me the video, I said. She showed me. All 47 minutes. On her phone, in her kitchen, with a cup of tea that neither of us touched. I watched my son cancel my insurance. I watched him sell my car. I watched him change my locks. I watched him carry boxes out of the house, boxes that I knew contained everything Patty had left me.
I watched it once. Then I watched it again. Then I put the phone down and sat in Margaret's kitchen chair and felt something happen inside me that I can only describe as a second death. Not physical, emotional. The death of the belief that my son loved me. The death of the assumption that the boy I'd raised would never hurt me. Patty's death had taken my wife. This video took my son. In 1 week, I'd lost both of them.
Warren,
Margaret said quietly.
I'm so sorry. Patty hoped this wouldn't happen. She prepared for it, but she hoped.
She always prepared for things she hoped wouldn't happen. That was Patty.
She also left something with me. A letter, for you. She said to give it to you only if Russell did what she was afraid he'd do.
Margaret went to her bedroom and came back with a sealed envelope, Patty's handwriting on the front.
For Warren, if it happens.
I opened it on Margaret's couch. Inside was a single page. Warren, if you're reading this, then Russell did what I was afraid he'd do, and Margaret has the proof. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. You would have confronted him. You would have raged, and he would have hidden his plans and done it later when there was no one watching. Instead, I made sure someone was watching. Margaret is the best person I know. She'll have the evidence. Frank DeLuca has the legal framework. And you have the truth. Here's what I need you to do. 1. Call Frank DeLuca. He has copies of everything, the trust, the protections, the contingency plans. 2. Don't go back to the house alone. Let Frank handle the legal re-entry. 3. Don't confront Russell yourself. Let the evidence do the talking. 4. And Warren, don't blame yourself. You trusted your son because you're a good father. I prepared for this because I'm a good mother. We both did our jobs. I love you. I'm sorry I had to fight this war from behind the curtain, but you were grieving, and grief needed your full attention. The rest was mine to handle. All my love, Patty. P.S. If Margaret's tea has gone cold, tell her to make a fresh pot. She always forgets to drink it when she's upset. I looked at the tea. It was cold. Margaret saw me look at it and started crying. She knew me so well, Margaret whispered. She knew all of us so well.
I tried to go to my house. My key didn't work. I stood on my own porch in my funeral suit and turned the key that had opened that door for 33 years. And it didn't turn. The lock was new. The key was useless. I was locked out of my own home on the day I buried my wife. I went back to Margaret's. I sat at her kitchen table, and I called a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Frank DeLuca. He was a criminal defense attorney that Margaret's son recommended. Margaret's son was a police officer in Roanoke, which would become relevant very quickly. Frank answered his phone on a Saturday evening because Margaret's son had texted him first. Dad's neighbor just got robbed by his own kid during his wife's funeral. There's video. Call this number. Frank listened to everything. Then he said 5 words that changed the trajectory of my life. Warren, we've got him cold. What do you mean? I mean your neighbor has 47 minutes of video showing your son accessing your home, using your computer without authorization, selling your vehicle without title or power of attorney, changing your locks to deny you access to your own property, and removing your personal belongings. In Virginia, that's breaking and entering, yes, even with a key, because the purpose of entry was criminal larceny, identity theft for the insurance cancellation, unauthorized sale of property, and potentially elder abuse, depending on how the DA wants to charge it. He's my son. He's a criminal who used his mother's funeral as a cover for a planned robbery. The video is timestamped. The funeral program is timestamped. The overlap is the evidence. Warren, your neighbor didn't just record a crime. She recorded premeditation. Frank filed a police report that night. Margaret's son, Officer Keith Owens, personally walked it through the system. By Sunday morning, a detective was assigned. By Sunday afternoon, the detective had reviewed Margaret's video, pulled the insurance cancellation records, traced the car buyer through the DMV, and confirmed that the locksmith, Bob's Lock and Key, had a receipt signed by Russell Briggs authorizing new locks at an address that Russell did not own. Russell was arrested on Monday morning at the car dealership where he worked, in front of his colleagues, in front of his customers, in the showroom where he'd spent a decade building the trust that he used to sell cars and steal from his father. The charges were severe: larceny, breaking and entering with intent to commit a felony, identity theft, unauthorized sale of property, elder financial exploitation. The DA added conspiracy after examining Russell's phone and finding text messages between him and Tasha that detailed the plan. The texts were damning. They'd been planning this for months. Tasha to Russell, February 14th. When is the funeral gonna be? We need to know how much time we have. Russell to Tasha, February 14th. Depends on when she dies. Could be weeks, could be months. Either way, the plan is the same. I go to the funeral, leave early, handle the house. You stay at the reception and cover for me. Tasha to Russell, March 1st. What about the car? Can you sell it that fast? Russell to Tasha, March 1st. Already got a buyer. Guy from Facebook Marketplace. $14,000 cash. He doesn't care about the title. I told him I'm selling it for my elderly father who can't do it himself. Tasha to Russell, March 22nd. What about the insurance? If you cancel it, he'll find out. Russell to Tasha, March 22nd. He won't check for weeks. He doesn't even know how to log in. Mom did all that, and Mum's not going to be around to help him. That last text. Mum's not going to be around to help him. Written on March 22nd, 12 days before Patty died. Written by a son who was counting down his mother's death like a project deadline. Measuring the days not in grief, but in opportunity. The detective showed me those texts in Frank's office. I read them once and asked to be excused. I walked to the bathroom and I broke. Not crying. Something past crying. A sound that came from a place inside me that I didn't know existed. The place where a father stores the love for his child. The place that shatters when that love is returned with theft.
The trial was held 4 months later. It lasted 3 days. Roanoke County Circuit Court, Judge Thomas Weber presiding. The prosecution was led by Assistant D.A. Catherine Marsh, a woman in her late 40s who specialized in elder exploitation cases, and who told me during our first meeting, "Mr. Briggs, in 15 years of doing this work, I have never seen a case where the timing of the crime was this deliberate or this cruel. Your son didn't just rob you. He choreographed it against the backdrop of his mother's funeral. The jury will not forgive that." She was right. Margaret testified on the first day. She brought her phone. The video was played for the jury on a large screen. 47 minutes of surveillance, time-stamped, continuous, unedited. Margaret narrated as it played, explaining what she was seeing in real time with the clarity and composure of a woman who'd spent 35 years presenting to school boards, parents, and superintendents. At 12:25, Russell arrives. He parks in the driveway and enters through the front door with a key. At 12:32, I can see him through the study window, seated at Mr. Briggs' computer, typing rapidly. At 12:45, a white pickup truck arrives. A man I don't recognize exits the truck. Russell comes out of the house. They speak for approximately 3 minutes. The man hands Russell an envelope. Russell hands the man a set of car keys. The man gets into Mr. Briggs' Honda Accord and drives away. She continued through every segment, the locksmith, the boxes, the departure. By the time she finished, several jurors were visibly angry. One woman in the back row had tears on her face. The defense attorney, a public defender named James Colvin, tried to challenge the video. "Mrs. Owens, isn't it unusual to record your neighbor's home for 47 minutes?
I was asked to watch the house by a dying woman who feared exactly this. I recorded because the evidence wouldn't exist otherwise. And, counselor, if you think recording a crime is unusual, I'd suggest you rethink your definition of unusual. What's unusual is a man robbing his father during his mother's funeral." "Mrs. Owens, were you instructed by anyone to surveil the property?" "I was asked by Patty Briggs, Mr. Briggs' late wife, to watch the house and document anything suspicious. She asked me in January 2024, 3 months before her death. She was afraid this would happen. She gave me her lawyer's phone number. She told me to call him first." "So this was a coordinated effort?" "This was a mother protecting her husband from her own son. She couldn't do it herself because she was dying of cancer. So she asked her neighbor, and her neighbor said yes." Colvin sat down. He didn't challenge Margaret again. The text messages between Russell and Tasha were entered as evidence on the afternoon of the first day. Catherine Marsh read them to the jury slowly, deliberately, letting each message land. February 14th. Tasha to Russell. "When is the funeral going to be? We need to know how much time we have." She paused. Let the jury absorb the date. Valentine's Day. A day about love, used to plan a robbery. Russell to Tasha. "Depends on when she dies. Could be weeks, could be months.
Either way, the plan is the same. March 1st. Tasha. What about the car? Can you sell it that fast? Russell. Already got a buyer. $14,000 cash. He doesn't care about the title. March 22nd. Tasha. What about the insurance? If you cancel it, he'll find out. Russell. He won't check for weeks. He doesn't even know how to log in. Mom did all that. And Mom's not going to be around to help him. Catherine let that last text sit in the silence of the courtroom for 10 seconds before continuing. Mom's not going to be around to help him. Written 12 days before Patty died, by her son, about her death, as a strategic advantage. I testified on the second day. I described returning from the funeral, finding the locks changed, learning about the insurance, learning about the car, watching Margaret's video for the first time, reading Patty's letter. And I described the texts.
Catherine asked,
Mr. Briggs, your son wrote, "Mum's not going to be around to help him." How did you feel when you read that?
like I'd already lost 2 people. My wife to cancer, and my son to something worse.
What's worse than cancer?
Greed. Cancer doesn't choose to destroy you. It's a disease. What my son did was a choice. He chose to rob me. He chose to time it during his mother's funeral. He chose to count down her death like a clock. That's not disease. That's character. And it's the kind of character that doesn't get better with treatment.
Mr. Briggs, your wife left a letter with Mrs. Owens predicting this. Did you know about the letter?
No, I didn't know about any of it. The letter, Margaret, the trust updates. Patty did all of it without telling me.
Why do you think she kept it secret?
Because she knew me. She knew I'd confront Russell. I'd rage. I'd break things. I'd try to fix it with anger instead of evidence. And Patty didn't believe in anger. She believed in preparation. She prepared the trust. She prepared Margaret. She prepared the letter. She prepared everything except telling me, because telling me would have undone all the preparation.
Your wife sounds remarkable.
My wife was the strongest person I've ever known. She fought cancer for 3 years. She protected me from our son while she was dying. And she did both of those things without ever asking for help, without ever complaining, and without ever letting me see how afraid she was. Catherine paused. The courtroom was silent. Then she said, "No further questions." Russell testified in his own defense on the 3rd day. His lawyer tried to present a narrative of a desperate young man overwhelmed by debt, pressured by circumstances, acting impulsively out of fear. The prosecutor's cross-examination lasted 45 minutes. Mr. Briggs, when did you first contact the car buyer on Facebook Marketplace?
I don't remember exactly.
Your phone records show March 3rd, 5 weeks before your mother's funeral. Was that impulsive? I was exploring options. You told the buyer you were selling the car for your elderly father who can't do it himself. Was that true? I was trying to make the sale easier. You were lying to facilitate a sale of property you didn't own. Is that accurate? I was going to tell my dad.
When? While he was at the cemetery? While the locksmith was drilling out his deadbolts? When exactly were you going to tell your father that you'd sold his car, canceled his insurance, changed his locks, and stolen his wife's jewelry? Russell didn't answer. Let me ask you one more question, Mr. Briggs. Your mother, the woman whose funeral this all happened during, did she know about your plan? No. Would she have approved? Russell's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. No, Russell said quietly. She would not have approved. Your mother spent 3 years fighting cancer. She fought every single day. And on the day she was buried, the day her fight was finally honored, you used those 4 hours to rob the man she loved. Is that accurate? That's not how I'd— Is it accurate, Mr. Briggs? Silence. Then, yes. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Russell was sentenced to 4 years in state prison. Tasha received 2 years of probation, 300 hours of community service, and a restitution order. Both were permanently barred from my property, my accounts, and any involvement in my financial affairs. My car was recovered. The buyer, a man from Roanoke who'd genuinely believed he was buying a car from a son helping his elderly father, cooperated fully and returned the Honda. He was not charged. He was, he told the detective, sick about the whole thing. My insurance was reinstated. Blue Cross Blue Shield reversed the cancellation after reviewing the police report. They flagged the incident as identity theft and added security protocols to my account. My locks were changed again, back to locks that my keys opened. The locksmith from Bob's Lock and Key was not charged, but was fined by the state licensing board for failing to verify property ownership before changing locks. Patty's jewelry was recovered from Russell and Tasha's apartment. All of it. The pearl necklace I'd given Patty for our 20th anniversary. The diamond earrings from our 25th. The gold bracelet her mother had given her on our wedding day. Every piece, sitting in a shoebox in Tasha's closet, waiting to be sold. The $8,500 cash was gone, spent. Russell had used it to make a payment on his BMW lease and pay 2 months of rent on the apartment he couldn't afford. $8,500 that Patty had saved, bill by bill, over 20 years. Emergency money, safety money, money that represented the discipline and caution of a woman who'd grown up understanding that the world doesn't protect people who don't protect themselves. Spent in 3 days on a car payment and rent. The restitution order required Russell to repay $8,500 plus the $14,000 from the car sale plus legal fees, a total of $31,200. Given that he'd be in prison for 4 years, the payments would begin upon his release. Frank estimated it would take Russell 10 to 15 years to repay the full amount. 10 to 15 years of monthly payments for a crime that took 87 minutes. Tasha filed for divorce 2 weeks after Russell's sentencing. She moved back to her mother's house in Lynchburg. The $2,400 a month apartment was abandoned. The BMW was repossessed. The credit card debt went to collections. The entire financial structure that Russell and Tasha had built, the lifestyle, the appearance, the performance of prosperity, collapsed like a building with no foundation. Because that's what it was, a building with no foundation. All surface, no structure. After the trial, I stood on the courthouse steps with Frank and Margaret. It was a warm Virginia afternoon. The dogwood trees along the street were in full bloom, the same white blossoms as the tree Patty had planted in our backyard the year Russell was born. How do you feel? Frank asked. Empty. That's normal. Is it normal to feel relieved and destroyed at the same time? For a father who just sent his son to prison? Yes, that's exactly normal. I looked at Margaret, this 72-year-old retired principal who'd stood in her kitchen window with a phone in her hand and recorded 47 minutes of evidence that saved my house, my finances, and my sanity. Margaret, I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Warren. Patty was my friend, and friends protect each other's families, even after they're gone. Why did you start recording? Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that I think about every day. Because I've spent my whole life watching children. And the thing I learned the thing 35 years of watching taught me, is that you can see who a person really is by watching what they do when they think nobody's looking. Russell thought nobody was looking. He was wrong. Life on Chestnut Lane is different now. Quieter. The house is mine again. The same locks, the same rooms, the same dogwood tree in the backyard. Patty's things are where she left them, her books on the nightstand, her coat in the hallway closet. The coffee mug with the faded "World's Best Mom" text that Russell gave her when he was 8 years old. I kept the mug. I drink from it every morning. Not to remember the boy who gave it to her, to remember the woman who received it, who held it in both hands and smiled like it was the most precious thing anyone had ever given her. Margaret comes over twice a week. We have coffee on the porch. We watch the dogwood. We talk about Patty, about the weather, about the neighborhood, about everything except the trial, which we've discussed enough. Russell wrote me one letter from prison. Short, careful. The handwriting was small, like he was trying to take up as little space on the page as possible.
Dad, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't forgive myself. Tasha and I were drowning in debt, and I convinced myself that what I was doing was survival. But it wasn't survival. It was theft. I stole from you on the worst day of your life. I used Mom's funeral as a cover. I treated her death as an opportunity. There's no excuse for that. There's no explanation that makes it okay. I'm sorry. I know sorry isn't enough. I know it might never be enough. I read the letter on the porch, in the chair next to Patty's empty chair. Margaret was in her yard, watering her garden. The dogwood was dropping its petals, white blossoms falling like slow snow onto the grass Russell used to play on as a boy. I put the letter in the drawer with Patty's things, next to the "World's Best Mom" mug, next to the pearl necklace and the diamond earrings and the gold bracelet, next to everything that Patty had kept and Russell had tried to take and Margaret had helped me get back. I haven't written back. I don't know if I will. Forgiveness is a house. You can't build it in a day. And some days, you're not sure you want to build it at all. But you leave the foundation open. You leave the possibility there. Because Patty would have wanted that. Patty always believed that people could come back from the worst versions of themselves. She believed it about Russell, even at the end, even when she was dying and Russell was counting the days. She told me 2 weeks before she died, "Warren, promise me you'll take care of Russell. He's not a bad person. He's a scared person. And scared people do terrible things." She was right. He was scared. The debt was real. The desperation was real. The fear of losing everything was real. But the choice to steal from his father during his mother's funeral, that was something else. That was the moment when fear became cruelty. And cruelty has a cost. I'm Warren Briggs. I'm 67 years old. My son canceled my insurance, sold my car, and changed my locks while I was at his mother's funeral. He did it in 87 minutes. He thought nobody was watching. But Margaret Owens was watching, from her kitchen window, with her phone in her hand, recording everything.
If you have a neighbor like Margaret, someone who watches, who pays attention, who shows up when it matters, tell them thank you. Because the people who protect us are rarely the people we expect. Sometimes they're the 72-year-old retired principal next door who loved your wife and refused to let your son destroy what she built.
And if you're a parent, watch your children. Not with suspicion, with attention. Notice who shows up at the funeral to grieve and who shows up to calculate. Notice who holds your hand and who checks the clock. Notice who cries real tears and who performs them. Because the difference between love and theft is not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like a son in a dark suit, sitting in the front row, crying at his mother's funeral. And sometimes that same son is already thinking about the locks. If this story touched you, leave a comment. Tell me what you would have done. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories about family, truth, and the people who watch from their windows when the world isn't looking. Before we close, this story, like all stories on this channel, contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. If this type of content isn't for you, that's completely okay. Take care of yourselves. But if you stayed until the end, thank you. Patty would have liked you. She always said the best people are the ones who stay when it would be easier to leave. Now, if you'll excuse me, Margaret's coming over for coffee, and the dogwood is blooming.
One last thing. A week after the trial ended, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been back since the funeral. I couldn't face it, the headstone, the dates, the finality of carved letters in granite. But the trial was over. The evidence had worked. The system Patty built from a hospital bed had functioned exactly as she'd designed it. And I needed to tell her. I brought two things: a cup of coffee from the kitchen, her mug, the one with the chipped handle that she'd used every morning for 15 years, and a copy of the verdict. Guilty on all counts, printed on courthouse letterhead. I sat on the grass beside her headstone. The cemetery was quiet. Spring was happening. The trees were budding, the grass was green, the air smelled like the beginning of something instead of the end. "Hey, Patty," I said. "I brought you a verdict." I placed the paper against the headstone, leaning it where she could see it if she were sitting across from me the way she used to sit on the porch. You were right. About everything. The debt, the plan, Russell, Margaret, the letter, the trust. You were right, and I was wrong. And I'm sorry I didn't listen when you tried to tell me. The wind moved through the cemetery. The trees rustled. A cardinal, a single cardinal, red as Patty's favorite lipstick, landed on the headstone and sat there for a moment, looking at me with one black eye. Margaret says hello. She's doing fine. She comes over twice a week and we drink coffee, and she tells me stories about you that I've heard 100 times but never get tired of hearing. She told me about the day you came to her house in January, how you sat at her kitchen table and laid out the whole plan, how you gave her Frank's number and said, "If it happens, Margaret, call him first." She said you were calm. She said you didn't cry. She said you were the bravest person she'd ever met. The cardinal tilted its head. "I'm going to be okay, Patty. I'm not okay yet, but I'm going to be. The house is safe. The accounts are safe. Margaret is next door. Frank is a phone call away. And the dogwood you planted the year Russell was born is blooming again. It blooms every year, no matter what happens, no matter who tries to cut it down." I finished the coffee. I stood up. I looked at the headstone one more time. Patricia Ann Briggs, 1959, 2024. She fought for everything. She protected everyone. I drove home. Margaret was on her porch waving. The dogwood was in full bloom, and the locks on my door were mine again.